So what happens when there's not enough oxygen around for you to do cellular respiration if you're an organism with mitochondria? There are alternate pathways to get your energy. They're not necessarily going to be as good as cellular respiration, but you can still make energy if you use these alternate pathways. One of the pathways that you're familiar with is the one that's going to create things like beer, wine, spirits, and bread. Does anybody know what the process is called, or do you know what the process is called that makes beer, wine, spirits, and bread? I know that one usually throws people, because these are what you get when you do cellular metabolism, not cellular respiration, but cellular metabolism, breaking down food in the absence of oxygen. So you may have said, I have no clue. And some of you might have known it's called fermentation. So fermentation is where organisms are going to, specifically one group of organisms we're going to see here in a second, use another pathway rather than cellular respiration to break down their food products into other molecules to make ATP. All right, so when there's not enough air around, not enough oxygen, they're going to use a different pathway. There's also lactic acid, which works as a byproduct, which is created in some organisms in the same sort of circumstances. And so that's actually why we've got the picture of a swimmer here, because humans create lactic acid when we run out of enough oxygen for our cells to do cellular respiration. So let's take a look at how this works. So normal cellular respiration, what we talked about in the last set of videos, you've got, an organism, in this case a human, and we've got oxygen present. So oxygen is going to be used to pull those electrons through the electron transport chain. That's what it means by an electron acceptor. And at the end, those electrons and the oxygen, along with things like hydrogen, are going to make water. Right? So this is the normal pathway. But in something like animals, like ourselves, if there's not enough oxygen because the exertion is too high, you're doing sprints, you're doing long-term running without a lot of practice and build-up, then something else is going to happen. Right? The thing that happens in animals is we run out of oxygen, so no oxygen, and instead of using oxygen to pull those electrons, we use pyruvate. Yeah, we use that pyruvate molecule to do the electron accepting. So not all of the pyruvate gets smashed up, and we use the pyruvate to pull electrons. It's not as effective. So it's not going to get us as much energy. And at the end, we make lactic acid. So this is commonly called lactic acid fermentation. And if you've ever done a lot of running or working out or something like that, especially if you haven't done it in a long period of time, you've probably woken up sore, right? What helps get rid of the soreness? Probably said something along the lines of, stretching, doing a workout again, giving yourself a couple of days. And those are all correct, because what those do is get your cells to start breaking down the lactic acid. Why do we make lactic acid instead of some other product? Lactic acid is less toxic in high concentrations than other molecules that we could make. Because the other option we could do is what happens over here in yeast. And yeast are the organisms that we use to make things like beer, wine, bread, and so on. So yeah, when you make bread, if you've ever smelled it, it smells a little bit like beer when you're rising the dough. That's because the yeast are doing fermentation to make the dough rise. And they're using a different molecule. You don't need to know these electron acceptors, by the way. But they're using a different molecule for their electron acceptor. Again, not as efficient. And the end product is ethanol. Ethanol might sound familiar. Ethanol is a type of alcohol. This is the alcohol that we can consume in smaller quantities safely. Yeah, you heard that right. Smaller quantities safely. Other alcohols are actually deadly to us. Ethanol is the only one that we can consume in any amount safely. And so we get the end product of ethanol with yeast for fermentation. And so that's how we end up getting things like the beer, wine, and spirits, as well as bread. When you bake bread, the bread actually, when it bakes, the alcohol bakes out of it. So that's why you don't get alcoholic bread. That finishes up cellular respiration and photosynthesis and fermentation. So that's the end of the energy chapters. Or I'm sorry, energy chapter.